السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مرحبا بكم جميعا. My name is Ghalia Ahmed Al-Ali from the Office of Development Affairs, and I would like to welcome you all to our first session today here in the Blue Hall. To start off, we have two brilliant experts here ready to enlighten us on behavioral diversity by talking us through an incredible wealth of data, informing us about behavioral trends across 70 countries. While policymakers can be quick to assume that individuals worldwide respond similarly to nudges and incentives, there's growing evidence that suggests that this is not actually the case. Our two speakers will help us better understand the key factors that affect human behaviors across cultures, which could inform how behavioral policies can and should adapt to different contexts. Our speakers are Professor Nikos Nikiforakis, Professor of Economics and Co-Director of the Center of Behavioral and Institutional Design at NYU Abu Dhabi. Professor Nikiforakis' main body of work consists of experimental studies investigating factors that impact on the evolution of cooperation. And we also have Professor Ernesto Reuben, Professor of Economics, Business, Organization and Society at NYU Abu Dhabi, and Global Network Professor of Economics at New York University. He leads various research projects investigating the foundation of cross-country behavioral diversity. Professors, welcome to the stage.
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, distinguished leaders, esteemed colleagues, honored guests, dear friends, dear students, good afternoon. It's an honor to have you in our session here at BX 2025, an event that is dedicated at advancing how we think, how we deliver better policies for the future, and how we design them. In this session, we turn to a question that sits at the foundation of good policy making. How much do we really know about the people we seek to serve? Understanding human behavior is not just useful, it's essential for building more effective, more just, and more resilient societies. So, I'm going to start with a question, but before that, I'm going to ask another one, which is not on the script, which is, where's the clicker? All right. I could answer this one. The second one is also rhetorical, and it goes like this. Would you feel comfortable using a weird transplant? Now, let me explain. Well, I will explain when... There you go. So, I hope you can see this. The design of policy interventions is typically based on theories. Theories about how people will respond to incentives, about their preferences, about their beliefs. But the demands of daily policy often mean that these theories are never tested, or at best, not tested on the population the policy will actually affect. Instead, policymakers often rely on policy transplants, importing ideas or interventions tested in other populations. So the underlying assumption here is that at a fundamental level, human behavior is similar across populations, and that even if there were differences, they must be small. Hence, a policy that worked in one place can simply be transplanted somewhere else. But what if the populations differ in meaningful ways? Much of our behavioral research, academic and applied, has been conducted in weird populations. Weird meaning Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and developed societies. And emerging evidence suggests that these populations are special, not just in small ways, but in profound ways. Institutions, cultures, and lived experiences matter. Not a little, a lot. To truly understand how policies will perform, we must study the diversity of human behavior using diverse populations and across a range of cultures. Only then can we move from assumptions to evidence, and from simplistic theories to effective policy design. That is the spirit behind the World Behaviors and Stereotypes Dataset. Led by Ernesto and myself, the dataset was made possible through the generous support of Tamkin. The WBSD, as we call it, is a flagship research project of our center, the Center for Behavioral Institutional Design, that was designed to help close the gap between theory and reality. The data collected with the support of Ipsos spans 70 countries, which account for nearly 90% of the global population. It includes observations from over 65,000 participants, and it draws on nationally representative samples across education, gender, and age. It is the largest and most ambitious dataset of incentivized behaviors and beliefs ever collected globally. The dataset gives us a window into how people around the world truly think, believe, and act. Not as we imagine them to be, but as they really are. And with that window open, we'll now explore three big picture questions about human behavioral diversity and its origins. Specifically, we'll talk about why in some countries, richer individuals are more dishonest than others. Then, we will look at the extent to which countries around the world are meritocratic and whether meritocracy actually pays off for them. Finally, we will provide evidence showing how events that happened centuries ago can affect behavior today. We'll do this by looking at how colonial experience colors the way people think about others. So, I'll start with the first one and I'll hand over to Ernesto for the other two. Are the rich more dishonest than the poor? High-income individuals exert growing influence on political and legal institutions. And there is an old stereotype that the rich are more selfish than the others. So this raises concerns that unethical behavior among economics elites can actually undermine governance, erode institutional integrity, and weaken societal trust. Now, research on the actual relationship between income and ethical behavior has been very, very limited. In specific, it has been only done in three so-called weird countries: the US, Germany, and the Netherlands. So, let's do it around the world. How are we going to do it? Let's make it fun, actually. Let's play a game that our participants did. I want you to think a number between 1 and 10. Don't say. Think of a number, keep it to yourselves, okay? Now, I will tell you, don't reveal yet, I will ask you whether you thought of the number 3. If you did, Ernesto and I will give you $20. For real. Well, the participants. If you didn't, it's okay, you'll get $20. So now I would like you to raise your hand if you thought of the number 3. Okay. This proves why you need incentives in your study. Because if we were actually having an envelope with money, there would be much more of you. All right, so this is how we measure honesty, and we actually pay people. So, what are hypotheses? What should we expect? Should the rich people really be expected to be more dishonest? Well, the story is a little bit more complex. There is a theory which suggests a causal pathway from institutional quality decades ago to intrinsic honesty, how likely we are to lie to begin with. It goes like this. It's from a Nature paper by Simon Gechter and Jonathan Schultz. That's the crux of the argument. They say, if cheating is pervasive in society and goes often unpunished, then people might view dishonesty in certain everyday affairs as justifiable without jeopardizing their self-concept of being honest. So, if we're used to break the law and get away with it, over time, that will become a norm, and even when no one is watching, we'll be lying or not. Now, there is some data from student samples in 23 countries in that paper. So before I go to rich and poor, I want to see if with our data, across age groups and across 70 countries, this holds true. And the answer is it does. You have the institutional quality index on the x-axis, as we call it. So high institutional quality is, for example, when there is low corruption, when the extent of the shadow economy is small. And on the vertical axis, you have the average dishonesty. And what you see is in line with this hypothesis from norms to behavior. You see as institutional quality increases, average dishonesty goes down. All right, so that establishes the importance of institutions, but what about the rich? So let me show you a nice figure that, only requires some explanation anyway. These are coefficients for each of the 70 countries. If you're below 0, it means that the higher income people lie less. If you're above the 0, it means the opposite. So the first thing you notice is there is no one answer, okay? So there is a lot of global variation. So the challenge here is to explain this. Can we explain why in some countries richer individuals are more dishonest? And we're extending the theory we saw before with the idea that if you are rich, you can get away with things because you have resources, lawyers, attorneys, connections, offshore bank accounts. You can get away with things that a poorer person will not. So if you extend this argument, you come with actually a hypothesis, which is as institutional quality increases, there should be a positive association between institutional quality and the relative dishonesty of higher income individuals. This means that in high institutional quality countries, the rich will lie in relative terms more than the poor, okay? Of course, they will still probably lie less than in the rich people in poor institutional countries, but so is there a positive association? Yes, there is a clear positive association. As the institutional quality is improving, this is the income dishonesty coefficient, which goes up. So that means that indeed, those with a higher income do lie more in relative terms. So the data shows that variations in institutional quality can have a profound impact on intrinsic honesty of citizens in general, but also their relative propensity to cheat. The better the quality of institutions in a country, the more likely wealthier individuals are to lie or cheat compared to the less well-off. So in other words, not only can institutions have long-lasting impact on individual behavior, but the impact can differentially affect different social groups, which can affect not only how these institutions evolve over time, but also economic growth. So I will now pass it on to Ernesto, who will tell us about the consequences of these things in study 2.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming, and thanks Nikos for the introduction. As Nikos was saying, we basically with this session we want to highlight some of the work that we've been doing and some of the very general message that we have. Now the next topic that we wanted to kind of touch upon is this idea of meritocracy. So if we think about what are some of the most fundamental incentives that society can have is what determines success, right? Since the time of Aristotle, there's this idea that success should be the outcome of merit. In other words, that societies should be meritocratic, right? A meritocratic society feels right in terms of it satisfies a sense of justice, but also it's efficient. It's in the sense that if the best and the brightest are rewarded, the argument goes, then that means that the most productive members of society will have an incentive to actually produce, and that's a benefit for everyone, right? So That's a good side of it. There's also critics of meritocracy. A lot of those would say something more like, well, meritocracies don't really exist, but if people believe that the rich are rich because of merit, that means that they deserve that, and that serves as a cover story for inequality. Right? So they're basically saying the idea of meritocracy is a bad thing. At the end of the day, these are empirical questions. And even though this is a fundamental sort of question for societies, how we think about how we structure incentives, it's a question that hasn't really been tackled empirically, and this is something that we wanted to try to do with this study. Right? So in short, what do we do? Our analysis boils down to a very simple definition of what is merit, and that's just say we want to define meritocracy as a society in which your skills are being rewarded. What do we mean by that? Well, by reward, we're going to be looking at your income, whether you have high income or low income. And by skills here, we're focusing on one specific skill, which is that of fluid intelligence, or sometimes your ability to do abstract thinking. And so this is a skill that we chose in part because it's been demonstrated that it helps productivity in a wide range of activities. It's not just defined for one narrow set, right? So this is what we did. We measured fluid intelligence using the Ravis matrices, which is a well-established tool from psychology to measure abstract thinking. And it's a great tool in the sense that it doesn't rely on language or having some form of formal education to be able to solve these things, right? So it's ideal for a cross-country study. So we gave this to all our participants. And here you see this is just the overall distribution, where on average, this is across the globe, participants are answering around between 5 and 6 correct matrices. But there's a big range. So there's around 5% answer correctly all 9, and some don't get any of them.
Is it clear to the audience that the correct answer here is A? Very good.
Yeah, not everyone gets it right. Okay, so what we're doing is very simple. It's just saying, okay, we have a measure of your fluid intelligence. How well does this correlate with income? And we're going to do this within each country. Right? That's what we call in our meritocracy index. So what do we find? Is being more or better at abstract thinking predicting higher income? And is this the same, or does this vary across countries? Pretty picture, but here's basically we're just visualizing the slope of this relationship. In around 25%, or actually the other way, in around 75% of the countries, we see that there is a positive relationship between abstract thinking and income. But we can also see that this varies a lot. In some countries, this is relatively flat. In others, this is steep. So this is, my way to say this is to say meritocracies do seem to exist, but this is not universal, right? We see a lot of variation across this. The next question then is, well, is meritocracy a good thing? Like, does this help us predict which countries have been more prosperous than others? Okay? That's this graph. So here, on the x-axis, we have our meritocracy coefficient, this relationship between fluid intelligence and income. And on the y-axis, we have the gross national income per capita in purchasing power terms. And again, we see this positive relationship. So countries that are more meritocratic by this measure are also countries with, that are produce more, that are richer. Okay? So this sort of vindicates the idea that meritocracy maybe is a good quality for society. When we go deeper into this, we actually can see that this relationship, this positive relationship, seems to be linked to institutions in the sense that institutions that we know help sort of leveling the playing field are the institutions where, are the countries where you find high meritocracy. And here is mostly what we see is related to institutions that make education and redistribution, right? So in a way, it's like the critics of meritocracy are both right and wrong. So meritocracies do exist, but they're right in the sense that actually for them to exist, we seem to need policies and institutions that ensure that there's a level playing field for people to be able to rise up. Okay. So this highlights again the importance of policy and the roles of institutions and how this can vary across the board. And it brings us to the next or the last topic, which is basically showing now how institutions can have long-lasting effects on behavior in something that's actually very, in some ways, unmeritocratic behavior. And here we're talking about colorism. So I don't know how many of you have heard this term before. What is colorism? So broadly speaking, colorism, as the word itself says, it means that you're treating people differently depending on the color of their skin. Typically, this is thought of as lighter-skinned people are favored over darker-skinned people, right? But it's the basic idea that your skin tone determines how people treat you. Unlike concepts like racism, for instance, which is much more linked to identity, colorism works also within ethnicities, within races, right? So it's how people interpret or the inferences people make based on the color of your skin. Okay. This is something that's been studied quite a bit in sociology, but with scant empirical evidence. It is theorized that colorism has its origins in colonialism. Specifically, that European colonizers, when they colonized a country or a land, they established institutions that would favor people that would look like them, right? So lighter-skinned people. And this translated into real status hierarchies with real consequences like access to jobs and education, that over time then established this sense that there is an association between skin color and particular characteristics. So that's the theory. In this project, we wanted to check whether that's true, whether institutions, so colonial institutions from hundreds of years ago, are affecting how we perceive people today. Okay. So, how do we operationalize this and look at colorism? We are doing it through people's beliefs. And specifically here, what we do is we asked people to predict the abstract thinking or the ability for fluid intelligence of dark-skinned versus light-skinned people. And people could use this simple slider to indicate whether they thought dark-skinned or light-skinned people are smarter, basically. Okay? We could actually pay people for the accuracy of this answer because we actually measured this trait as well, but that gives this extra incentive to really reveal what you actually think, right? So by this definition, we're thinking, well, a colorist society would be one where light-skinned individuals are considered smarter than dark-skinned individuals, irrespective of what reality actually is, okay? Now, how does this look across the world? Again, what we see is lots of variation, okay? In some countries, this is decidedly true. People think light-skinned people are smarter, but that's not universal. We see a lot of countries where where there is basically no difference. In a few countries, this is actually reversed, right? So evidence of colorism, certainly. Can we organize, or can we understand this as being rooted then in this colonial past that we're talking about? Is it true that countries that used to be European colonies are more colorist or have more colorist beliefs compared to countries that were not European colonies, that were never colonized, or the colonizers themselves? The answer is yes. We do see a difference here. So it does look like having been a European colony today implies they have higher colorist beliefs than even the colonizers themselves, right? So this is something that's been passed on for a long time. And the interesting part here too is that this is not just about what people believe. It does have consequences. Here, we're plotting on the x-axis the years a country spent as a colony, as a European colony. And on the y-axis is what we're calling the skin income gap, meaning how does your income change with the color of your skin? So above 0 means that lighter-skinned people earn more than darker-skinned people. Below 0 would be the other way around. And this is concentrated on those countries that were European colonies. What we see here is that, by and large, lighter-skinned people do earn more than darker-skinned people, and that this gap increases with the number of years you spent, the country was a colony. Okay? Again, highlighting how institutions can have these really, really long-lasting effects once they become norms and they become part of people's identity. Okay. So, to conclude, we use a novel, large-scale, global incentivized data set of behaviors and beliefs, which it took us a couple of years to collect with the help of 3 fantastic postdocs, Lina, Moritz, and Robert. So thanks for that. And what we find is clear. There is considerable variation in beliefs across the globe, both across and within countries, and this variation matters. If we want effective policy, we can't rely on this one-fits-all type of solutions. We've heard this already from the Reed Theater, right? We need behavioral insights that are globally informed, but locally grounded. What we've shared with you today is really just a snippet of the data set that we've created. It's far richer than what we can present in short 30 minutes, right? But I hope it sparked your interest in this type of work, right? Thanks to the generous contributions of Tamkeen, we're very excited about the next steps for this, where we're planning to launch a second wave of data collection, which I promise you is even more exciting than the first.
Ernesto, before you thank them, can I just say one thing? The snippets you said we shared, I saw you were clicking away, which is fantastic. Maybe you want to learn from it. Maybe you want to say how great it is on social media. One social norm we have in academia is we don't post results before they publish. So feel free to express your enthusiasm, but not our results before out there. And now we can thank the audience.
Thank you. I think we could.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both, Professor Nikos Nikiforakis and Professor Ernesto Reuben. That was incredibly interesting and really highlighted the need for deep cultural understanding when designing behavioral policies. Thank you. We will be back in the Blue Room at 2:45 for our next session titled Keeping Antibiotics Working, with behavioral insights. Thank you, everyone.